and another 10 when I lived in Northampton, so I've done 25 years, I think, almost. I should have an anniversary.
You should, or be released from the sentence guy or something, yeah.
But I thoroughly enjoy meeting people, because after all, WA courses are partly social, aren't they? As well as learning things. And last night was a typical example in Windsor where we had an interesting announcement by NASA of the discovery of a huge amount of water. But how it was found was really complicated until I discovered there were 2 retired chemists in the audience who were able to decode the jargon for the benefit of the class. Isn't it wonderful, all these skills that come to us from the actual students themselves? But anyway, I'm based in Basingstoke. I suppose 50-mile trips are okay for full courses. For day school it could be anything, because I teach all around the country and give talks, so distance isn't really too much of a problem. 5, 7 or 10 days. If you want a practical aspect to astronomy, evenings are far better, of course, because it's dark. The only problem is it's usually cloudy as well, so I have a big problem with the cloud. This is the longest run of cloud we've had in 15 years, by the way. Where I live, it's since October the 20th. But times will change, I hope. You can have also a daytime one, and I think history is particularly well suited to that, really. I've just come back from Canada, where I was using a telescope which is 100 years old and one of the largest in the world. What a thrill it was, because we were tracking near-Earth objects, as we call them, which includes the one that the press seized on a few days ago. We knew quite safely where it was going, so I could reassure every student in all my classes it wasn't going to hit us. The nearest was 200,000 miles, and then one student said, well, we'll hit the moon. Well, actually, it wasn't far from the moon. She was quite right. But you seem very concerned about the question of impacts. We've, of course, got a very famous astronomer, or we did have, near here, William Herschel. And also, I'm going to talk in my history a lot about Caroline, because his sister is very underrated. She holds the record for the most comets ever discovered from the UK, as well as many other things. So Herschel could fill 10 weeks, actually. So my first course really is an introduction to observing the night sky, because obviously lots of new people come into these courses. Nothing too complicated at all, don't need mathematics or any sort of degrees or anything like that. I'm a practical observer, so I just talk people through it, and if it's a nighttime one, that's obviously a great advantage. Follow-up is normally to do with the galaxy. In other words, we're moving out in distance. But now increasingly the forefront of science, which is the discovery of planets elsewhere. And one of my contacts is on a mission called Kepler, which has discovered and announced recently over 1,200 planets, far more than anybody could ever have dreamt of. And now increasingly a lot that look very much like the Earth. And you know where that's leading.
Yes.
Well, the water announcement this week, which we were discussing in Windsor last night and at Winchester earlier in the week, is incredible. A star just formed, incredibly young. We usually mean about 100 million years, but that is young in astronomy. And surrounded by a disk which contains planets growing by virtue of rocks and water vapour joining together. This is the first time it's ever been achieved, and this all happened in the last few days, and now, with the help of chemists in the audience last night, we understand the story. History is popular, I've said already, as an alternative to all of this, and I know the WA has an emphasis on history. 4,000 years at least I have to cover. At the moment there are 12 weeks of material growing, so I guess 2 courses maybe is sensible of 5 or 6 weeks each, but you must let me know what you want. The history is incredibly detailed, and the one thing that appears fascinating to me is that these people were far cleverer than we ever could have conceived. It's very easy for us to sit here with a great deal of knowledge in this audience and think, well, yes, that's obvious, isn't it? But it wasn't. In fact, most of the things Herschel found were far from obvious. But now, of course, we've got all that information in textbooks. Just on practical astronomy, which started as a new course, only at Winchester and Windsor so far, trips on all my courses involve going to observatories, because people who join courses want to see through a telescope. There can be no doubt about that. I actually am also now working for the Royal Astronomical Society, which is the largest professional body in Europe, and I'm on the library committee there, and you might think libraries could be boring, but I can assure you we've got some unique books that are nowhere else in the world, so it's a fascinating trip as well. But observing, we've got just about an observatory within spitting distance at every place I teach now.